I'm head of supporter services at the Premier League, and that means that we provide a support service both to clubs and to fans. As Joyce said, I sort of came from the outside, of lobbying from the outside. And when I was first asked to work at the Premier League on a permanent full-time basis, I was quite reluctant. I think I was acutely aware that lobbying from the outside can be a lot easier than lobbying from the inside. Excuse me. Just let them get the IT sorted out properly first. Right, yeah. Having said that, I think once you're on the inside, it does give you the possibility and the ability to affect change, and that's really what my role is all about. The Premier League isn't a governing body. We're a competition organiser. And it is quite an important distinction because our role is to work on behalf of the 20-member clubs. But we always consider that if we're working on behalf of 20 clubs, then we're also working on behalf of all the fans who support those clubs. And it doesn't mean that we don't take our responsibilities seriously as a competition organiser. I think what we want is the experience of going to a Premier League match to be superb in all its aspects. We want it to be the best that it can be, and that means the best it can be for everybody, whether that's from finding out information about the club, buying tickets, and sometimes I'm still frustrated at how difficult it can be to find out on our club websites the simplest of things like how can I buy a ticket, whether you're disabled or not. We always still have work to do in these areas. But in particular, the most important aspect of all of this is always accessibility for us. This means having world-class facilities, but it isn't always just about having a stadium like this, because you can have a superb stadium, you can build it to the best possible I can't even say that word today, you know what I'm trying to say, to the best possible spec. But if you don't have the people providing the best service, then it falls down. It doesn't work and people don't have the best experience. And we're always very aware that's really, really important. But it's surprising how often those two things go together. When you actually do have really good facilities, often the staff are the best that you can find. And when you think about it, perhaps it's not that surprising. If we treat our staff well, if we look after them, if we give them a good environment to work in, they come to work with a smile on their face, they're always going to treat the customers better. I'm thrilled sometimes when I go to some of our clubs. I know for me, when I go to Arsenal or Manchester City, I wish that I was a fan of one of those two clubs, because the service that you get there is absolutely fantastic in my experience, certainly recently. And I think it's something that all of our clubs should be trying to follow. And that doesn't mean they're not, then they're all sort of falling down in their area. It just means that I think we can always be looking to how we can do things better and how we can improve. And even with those stadiums, as I say, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed to have the best experience if it isn't accessible. And if we're not making it clear how you can buy tickets, and we're not having disability liaison officers who are working with the fans properly. So this is where the disability liaison officers come in. I don't want to get too hung up on terminology, but we like to call them access officers these days. We're hoping that everybody will start to think of themselves as an access officer, because that's what their role is. Their role is to make the whole place accessible, to make sure that fans are welcome, that they have every opportunity to access the game, and also, I think, particularly for the access officers, to make sure that their colleagues understand that. And I think that can be one of the hardest bit of the role for the access officers. In my experience, the access officers are the most hardworking, most dedicated and selfless people working in football. I don't just say that because I'm here today. I really think they are. In my experience, they seem to work incredible hours. And they always seem to be fighting battles. And that's not generally with the supporters. They're generally having to fight internal battles, whether it's with the ticket office manager or the safety officer or somebody who thinks they have a view on health and safety which may contradict their view on access. They're always having to persuade people. You know, it's very much a role of influencing people. And they're often having to influence from the bottom up. They're not always people who maybe have a lot of authority, and so that can be a real challenge for them. Our role at the Premier League really is to support them in what they're trying to do, is to provide the tools that we can provide for them, to provide them the resources, encouragement a lot of the time, and to give them confidence in what they're talking about. You know, we get a lot of calls in the office from access officers who will just say, am I right about this? You know, we've got this policy, and everyone's telling me I'm crazy, but I think I'm right. Can you give me some reassurance here? We provide them a lot of guidance with advice, support. We get regular queries from them. And in particular, we get a lot of requests for legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, But I have got to know the Equality Act pretty well. And the one thing that you have to understand in this country about the Equality Act is that it's all based on what's reasonable. And I find myself so often saying to access officers, well, do you think that's reasonable? Is the policy that you're suggesting reasonable? And that question isn't always what they want to hear. They want to hear that it's black and white answer. They want to hear, is this legal or not? Am I okay? Can you give me some guarantee that if I do this, I'm not going to be sued? And again, my answer is always, well, do you think it's reasonable? And do you think a court will think it's reasonable? Do you think a court will rule in your favour with the decision what you're making? And that often gets them thinking, and that often gets the policies changed. We work together to try and get our access officers to learn from each other as well. They're the people that are working on the ground with the fans, with their club colleagues every day, and they're really the experts in the field along with the fan groups. You know, we always like to refer to fans really in our business as the experts, because they're the experts in our product, if you like. Never like calling it a product, but if you think about it that way, they're the people who use the product, they're the people who have to access it. And so often it is only by talking to fans and by access officers really having a good, strong relationship with fans that they can understand what the issues are. And that sometimes the smallest of changes can take place at a club that might seem really small at a club, but in fact can make a massive difference to the people who are trying to access the game, for the people who just want to experience it in the same way as everybody else. I think we've come a long way. I think that there's a much better understanding in the English game of accessibility than there used to be. But we always have to keep providing more tools, and sometimes we do find that we're always dealing with the same issues. In particular, I'm sure it's something you've discussed, but the very basic issue of realising that you can't always see somebody's disability. You know, we're often talking to our clubs about when they say things like, well, we have X number of spaces for disabled people. And I say, do you mean wheelchair spaces? Because really, you shouldn't be limiting the number of spaces you have for disabled people. You could have a stadium full of disabled people, if those were the people that chose to come to the match, just like you could have a stadium full of children or senior citizens or anybody. And I think once people realise that, they do start to think about accessibility in a little bit of a different way. So what do? Well, we provide tools, as I say, where we can. We get all our access officers together for regular meetings so they can learn from each other. And on the screen here we have something that we developed, which is an ebook. We called it Open for Business, and it's a guide for clubs about how they can welcome fans to football. The Open for Business title isn't really a new strapline. It's probably a bit of a cliche, but we felt it was relevant because we want the clubs always to think that this is about being really, really open for business. And we wanted to avoid using all the usual terms, I suppose, and avoid using words like disability in it all of the time. So what the ebook does for the access officers is provide them with all sorts of different information about the whole experience of going to the match, the whole supporter journey, and it takes them through every aspect from the pre-match, what accessibility means to people, all of the areas that you might have to consider. They can flick through it, as you can see, in different ways here. Flicked back too far there. The pre-match build-up, you know, getting clubs to think about their websites, and giving the access officers a tool so that they can then go and talk to the department in their club that is responsible for the website. Again, it's about influencing those different departments within the club about what is relevant and what people need to know and how they need to get access to that information. And I think for an access officer, it's probably a role of being sort of constantly vigilant about all the changes that are taking place in the club and trying to keep on top of that and making sure that whatever decisions are made sort of in a positive way and that they don't have any negative impact in terms of disability or access. We talk about at the match, and through the book there are various videos that you can see here where you can click on them to watch the particular film, and just to give people a little bit more of an insight into what it's like. I'm going to play this one if the technology will work for us here. I hope it will, because this gives us a little bit of a voice from the fans, the experts, as we say, who really know about how staff.
We tend to enjoy matches more when the stewards and the staff are friendly and when they're really helpful. I mean, very often we do go and try and talk to them, and if they're friendly, it's a much better experience.
The there are challenges because we're working with a Molineux Stadium now that's 15 years old, that's 17 years old in some cases. So we haven't got the facilities that we'd like to. The new Molineux Stadium and the new rebuilt Molineux Stadium in many years to come will of course have high-level seating, upper-tier seating that unfortunately currently we can't provide, but we've got a clear dedication to having that facility in the near future when new Molineux is developed. Staff can make the biggest difference to ensuring that a disabled supporter's enjoyment of a fixture is met. We can't always move seating areas, we can't always facilitate and make changes to the bricks and mortar, but what we can do is make sure the needs of a disabled supporter is met.
They've been great, but there have been downsides to almost every place you go to, because not everywhere can cater for everything that the disabled fan needs. We tend never to be as close as we are here today as a family. This doesn't happen. Normally the disabled section is some distance away from the rest of where the rest of the fans are, and you're lucky if you get close. How this has worked today I don't know, but normally we would be anything from 20-30 rows apart, maybe in a different tier, even possibly in different sections.
We treat the same as everyone else and just have a nice time really.
So as you can see, we still have some way to go. We still need to make some progress. But I think through our access officers, we've got a network of people there that are dedicated to making sure that progress happens and is speeded up more than perhaps otherwise it would be. I think they're the key people in the clubs that are trying to move the process on towards accessibility as quickly as possible so that it really does become truly accessible for all of you. Thanks. Thank you.